Welcome to the Gen AI podcast, where the future meets fun and tech talk trends. Get ready to dive into the world of artificial intelligence like never before. Your hosts, Dale, Alan, Greg, and Val, are about to take you on a wild ride through the AI universe. So, buckle up, tune in, and let the AI adventure begin.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another brand new episode of the Gen AI podcast. It's always good to be back with you and thank you once again for joining us. Al, how long do you think we'll go before Val joins us? So we're going to put some predictions on this.
I have a prediction. Val is always in the next one.
Okay. So
which makes me never wrong.
Yeah, so I once saw in a shop store that a sign saying we are providing discounts tomorrow, and that sign was always up.
So. Yeah. It's also like the old joke. What's the correct number? Oh, you can't see them. What's the correct number of guitars? One more.
For those that can't see, Al has basically got an entire guitar shop in his study.
Almost getting close.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good to have variety, diversification, right? So you have options.
Yeah.
No, it's all good. How are you, Al?
Yeah, amazing as always. And it's sunny. It's nice. Can't ask for anything better.
Yeah, exactly. Sun shining in the UK. What more could you want? Also, shout out to Greg. We haven't forgotten about you, Greg. But you are more frequent than Val, shall we say?
But we still miss you.
But we still miss you, exactly. Long may your beard grow. But look, let's get into it. I think we were going to try and delve into quite a specific area on this one because we've been quite general in the past few. And something that you're probably more familiar with than me, but I'm quite interested to kick the tires on AI in engineering design. So getting AI to help with designing the stuff that we are delivering on projects. So where do you want to start with this? Because you're involved with a whole host of different organizations, associations, committees. Your CV is incredibly long. So
yeah, I'm working on my politics career. Yeah. AI in engineering, I think like maybe the important thing to signpost immediately is that it looks like, and I underline looks like because we don't really know until things start happening, but it does look like the governing bodies are starting to take it seriously. So the keynote at this year's convention for the American Society of Civil Engineering is all about AI. I don't remember the title exactly, but it's the opening keynote on, well, the second day, because the first day of the convention is always like touring around the city that you're in to look at architecture and buildings. But yeah, the main keynote is AI in engineering and what are the opportunities, etc. Like the other thing that is kind of true, like now the ASC has an AI policy committee. I'm not quite sure what the ICE is doing, but it's going to be something similar, right? And I think all the other governing bodies around the world are probably doing the same, right? Especially when you start thinking about how do you decide what's acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah, and I think, we've spoken previously about who should and shouldn't be involved, from government all the way through to individuals, and I think everyone has a part to play, and it's good that I think people are focusing on this. Organizations and associations are focusing on these things, because the more we talk about it, the more we'll narrow it down. Not that you need to or necessarily want to narrow it down too much, but that we have the guardrails in place. So interestingly though, how does that then apply and affect the application or use of AI in engineering design? Because are we now talking potentially about, is there a maturity roadmap or a roadmap where we're going from individuals sitting there with tools, designing stuff, all the way through to autonomous agents creating the design and then humans just sort of reviewing it?
I think so. I think there's some sort of roadmap of that kind. Yeah. I don't quite know what it would look like, but from a high level, you could probably imagine we'd be going from, exactly as you said, from humans doing AI aided design. Now, after I said this, watch every single CAD software product rename itself to IAD, all the way to, now the architect and the civil engineer are like one person in the middle managing multiple work streams simultaneously and just verifying that what's going through is correct. I think there's a lot of steps in between. One of them being the fact that you cannot get rid of the notion of someone being responsible, especially when we're talking about civil engineering and architecture and structure, fundamentally, right? Like who's responsible? So we have this notion of the responsible engineer that's not going to go away. So the responsible engineer is also responsible for how things get engineered. It's kind of the same today. Do you do structural calculations by hand on a piece of paper following the rules that you learned in school, or do you use tools for them? Obviously, you use tools, but you're still responsible. So you end up like trusting the tool in a sense. And you need to build that trust over years and years and years.
So is it the case, if we're going with that roadmap, let's say that is the way things will pan out, and we know that's as soon as you put a plan or roadmap in place, it's not going to happen like that. That's a given.
Yeah.
But let's say that is the roadmap, right? And that's the trajectory. Are we saying then, because my thoughts is what do we need for that end state, right? So what do we need for AI, call it an AI agent, if you will, to design a building, to design a railway, to design water and waste treatments, to design a nuclear facility, to design these things, right? In the virtual world, right? What are the, one of the thoughts I had was AI is not too dissimilar to humans, because you are what you eat, right? If you eat unhealthily, you will be unhealthy. So if you have unhealthy data that you're creating stuff off of,
okay.
it's an unhealthy outcome.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
And so what do we need for AI to consume in order for it to produce something that is healthy and a healthy outcome?
Yeah, I mean, if I really knew, I would just start building all these things. So I'm going to speculate. It's called a like educated guess. I think we're going to need a lot of labeled or commented examples. So LLMs and GPTs and language models in general, really good now also at giving you a structure, right? Like you could actually go to ChatGPT and ask it to create an XER for you, but the content won't quite be good. Or you can ask it to create a CAD design. It will do these things, right? Because it knows the file formats, so it will write them out for you, but it won't be quite what you want in there. And I think there's this extra step that we're going to need where these models are not just going to be general LLM, right? You're going to need probably not even a fine-tuned LLM. I don't think they're going to be language models, but there will be specialized models that can run, call it like a guided simulation or a guided generation of the actual artifact. So if you think about design, you want something that outputs probably an AutoCAD format or something, right? And that outputs something that is what you asked it. And then around it, you build a whole agent that guides that thing. So it's you maybe ask the agent, I want to design a 2-story house with a flat roof and lots of glass and raw concrete, and it's on a slope on a hill, and it'll start generating these things. And he's like, oh, hey, wait, I've got the geological survey. Here's the ground map. and it starts putting all those things in together, you kind of need that intermediate guidance step that iterates the generating model, so that you're going to need those things. So this is how you build it. And the data that you're going to need for it is to create that model is lots of different versions of the same two-story house. Did I say two-story house? Two-story house, right? Labeled in different ways. Like these are the windows. This is if you make it with bricks. This is if you make it in another way. So the model learns differences, and it learns them in the native format of what it is that you're trying to generate. In some applications, that might actually just be a fine-tuned LLM. In others, it will have to be a complete new model.
Yeah, I mean, so we previously mentioned that LLMs aren't particularly good with numbers, but I think you said they're fairly accurate with things like that. And I think when it comes to structural design, it needs to be fairly accurate with numbers, particularly if you have large scale quantities and the like that you have to consider. But then there's other aspects like, environmental impacts and aesthetics and, the ground conditions, so the types of foundations that you need, the types of loads and things like that. So some of the things, cost considerations, right? So some of these things we potentially do have readily available, but others, for example, is forecasting how environmental impacts will change. Whether there's wind conditions that will get stronger or not, etc., etc. Earthquakes, the potential of earthquakes and things like that. So, in terms of humans, is that sort of intuitive, or do we have the healthy data for an AI to consume and consider for engineering design or structural design?
It's a bit of both, right? Like if you're designing buildings, your training process, air quotes, is to learn first principles into, I always get these the wrong way around, into system 2, which is basically prefrontal cortex driven and completely rational. And then they make you do it a bunch of times so that you also build the system 1 intuitions to guide you into doing that. And that's what your training data is, right? So like from a human perspective, you really do both.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do is replicate what humans do. Or are we? Or should we?
There's a big moral dilemma there, right? Should we replicate what humans do? Should we do better than what humans do just by doing it differently, right?
Yeah, specifically within the context of AI in the engineering design space.
Yeah,
Because
should we?
We've seen the disasters, the tragedies that have happened. I think was a couple of years ago where was it in Miami? Was it in Florida somewhere where that building collapsed? Those apartment blocks and things like that.
There's usually a lot of other facets on this kind of stuff as well, right? Like, especially when people are involved, you then ask the question like, were the right materials used? Were there any corners cut? It's not necessarily there was a bad design, and I really don't know anything about the event, so I don't think we can really say anything about that. But what we can say is that if you copy exactly what humans do, you are copying the mistakes that humans do, and perhaps we should try and do things a little bit better, right? That is why humble calculator is better than a human at the thing it does, because it's not copying what the human does, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we should take a little bit of that principle, right? So like, should we have, I don't know, CFD software is basically the same thing, right? should we have CFD that is as good as a human at simulating the flow of fluids, or should it be better and different and never make a mistake?
Yeah. Will it never make a mistake? That's the other thing, because we've previously spoken about today's problems are yesterday's solutions. So there'll always be a problem to solve, I guess.
Yeah.
That's human nature. But let's play out scenarios here and continue on this theme. Let's say we've figured it out. Let's say we figured it out, right? And that we know the right ingredients, healthy data coming in. We get to a stage now where it produces designs that's considered all of the various elements it needs to consider, and we've got a sound design, and now we have to deliver on this design. You get digital twins and the like. How do we see that then translating? Do we see AI taking that a step further beyond just the design element into the delivery element, where you're actually now going to, whether it's a construction site or whether it's a large mega project that's not in the built environment, whatever it is, that's actually starting to deliver. You previously spoken about AI agents as well. Do we then see these AI agents controlling robots, so robotics on site, that's linked to the digital twin, let's call it? Let's futurescape a little bit. I mean,
yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Right, like, so have all the agents doing all the work for us. We got the digital twin that has been generated by some agent, and then the delivery agent figures out how do you build it, and then you have the project manager agent that runs the construction, and all the different foreman agents that talk to all the robots. They build it, and literally, like, now you're playing SimCity, right? Because you click a button and a building appears. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Except for all the people that have had to like readapt their roles. I think we'll always have someone in the loop. When you have things like the built environment, when you have, in a sense, this is the major reason that's holding back self-driving cars, right? Other than people can't get over it as well, and it freaks them out, and they can't trust the machine to drive, and that it drives a million times better than them in the parts where it's allowed to drive, right? Is that you can't point a finger. Right? If a Waymo taxi runs off the pier in San Francisco and sinks, hopefully with nobody on it, but say that it has someone on it, who goes to prison or whose license gets revoked at the very least, right?
So
surely Waymo.
Yeah, so if I challenge that or bring a different perspective into it as well, we've previously spoken about airplanes, right? And how they are practically autonomous. They can take off by themselves, they can land by themselves, they can fly themselves. Why do you have pilots on board? It's in case something goes wrong, and also how many people would actually really feel safe with no pilot on a plane? I'd go for it. I'd try it out. Yet it is the safest form of transport.
Yeah, I mean, this is also true of self-driving cars, right? Like, the number of accidents per million miles on self-driving cars is incredibly low.
So with that though, when a tragedy does strike in the airline industry, who's held responsible?
It depends, right? And the answer is always it depends.
Yeah.
But we have this practice now, right? Like, if you design a bridge and it turns out that the structure was wrong and that bridge collapses, you very clearly have a responsible engineer who's responsible in the title of it. And I think we're not going to lose that. I think, because we kind of need that. Right?
And what if it wasn't the design that caused that bridge to collapse?
What do you mean, like a natural disaster sort of thing, or?
Could be that. Could be sabotage, could be anything else.
Yeah, you have other things, right? Like,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about the bridge that collapsed in Italy a few years ago, right? Like, poor maintenance, bad concrete. Probably during construction, money changed hands that shouldn't have, and some materials, yeah. There's been hints of that, and you go and try and find who the culprits are. Which actually, like, maybe this is the interesting bit, right? Like, models write log files, so you know exactly what they've done all the time, every time, right?
Do humans do that?
No.
Exactly.
In fact, the more villainous a human, the less they log their actions.
Yeah. So if you're working with someone that doesn't log their actions, that's the key nugget out of this episode. Nothing to do with AI.
Yeah.
All about.
Or I mean, like, they're not necessarily evil, right? Like, they might be just lazy. Yeah. I never do my expense reports, and it's not because I'm evil. I'm just lazy and I can't be bothered.
Is that another guitar you've got?
Yeah, right. No, they always reconcile at the end.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one because for me, certainly, I've typically been involved in my experience, particularly from a project controls perspective, with the cost, the schedule, and this is from a delivery perspective, when it's in delivery, right? But we've often spoken about where projects fail is actually before delivery, in concept design, in when they're designing the engineering aspects, the structures, etc. When they in its infancy is where it typically fails. And so if we go all the way back to the start, is can AI help us at the very beginning? I think there is definitely a place for it. I don't know where, how, or what though, because well, one, that's not my speciality, but two, if we require someone to be responsible and accountable for any mishaps or disasters, and AI is designing the thing that we're delivering, who is that person? Does it change from a responsible engineer, or do you still have that in place to review it? Does it become the business, the entity, the organization? Because what if it happens in 10, 20 years time? Things change, or in 100 years time, does it become, if it's large infra, does it become government? Who's actually responsible? Is it the person or the organization that's signed off the use of AI to do this design?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think the one thing that comes to mind for me is completely unrelated, but a very similar situation, is information security. So right now, nobody really wants the job of chief information security officer, because that's the person that goes to prison if there's certain violations or if there's a data breach.
Yeah. How much do they pay?
Not enough.
Exactly. Yeah. And because with that as well is this is an interesting one as well. And we previously chatted a little bit about the use case of a blockchain technology. And if it's all sort of recorded, and if it's all accessible, and let's say we're using that within this context as well of design and it's iterative, does that also pose a threat? Wars, sabotage, all these types of things. I know we're getting into that space, but it comes back to what we're talking about.
I guess if anything is supposed to be classified, you keep it classified, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have. I guess there's a difference between not logged at all and restricted access.
Okay. Yep.
Right? So, like, blockchains mostly are based on the principle of logged and completely open.
Yep.
Right? So it's all out in the open. Everybody agrees because it's there for everybody to see and double check, and everybody agrees on it. Right? That's kind of basically the whole principle behind it. And in some cases you can do that. In some cases you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But even in the cases where you shouldn't do that, you should probably still trace.
And I'm just then. So I'm then wondering. Sorry, I'm pausing just to think about that aspect as well, because when you have, you're not necessarily having one person design an entire thing, right? You have, I mean, let's take let's take anything. I mean, just pick a house because it's simple, right? You might have an architect, but then they may want to consult with the plumber, with the bricklayer, with the electrician, the
Yeah.
window suppliers and the door suppliers, etc., etc.
Yeah, you have all sorts
Design.
of specialties.
Yeah, and then you obviously scale that up into large mega infrastructure projects, and you've got a whole host of various stakeholders in place. Do we how far do we go? I think in terms of AI completely designing everything with all inputs versus. And I know you don't have the answer. I know this is a difficult one, but we're just sort of musing around this topic. To either communicating with those people, those specialities, or drawing the information that they've got. Because
So
is it all in one? So sorry. Let me reframe my question.
yeah.
So that's more specific. Is it an all-in-one solution type thing, or is AI the architect, or you know what I mean? The
No,
designer.
I do know what you
Yeah.
mean. I do know what you mean. Like, do we have agents that do the specialism versus just do the whole job?
Yeah.
Right. How I guess, predetermined outcomes, and I'm going to explain why, but
Okay.
that might have a bearing into this. So
Predetermined outcomes in the context of what?
the universe,
Okay.
right? So like, there's this
Yeah. There's this
school of
notion of
thought, right? That like everything in the universe is predetermined because everything is a consequence of preceding conditions, which probably isn't true.
I think if you're asking me personally, I guess listeners, you decide for yourselves. But my personal view on it is, I don't think it's totally predetermined. I think you, I think you could predict potential outcomes based on where you're brought up, where you're schooled, your family construct, all those type of things, the type of interest you have. There's nature versus nurture. There's opportunities. There's a bit of luck. So I think it's a mixture of things, right? You're predisposed to ordinarily have, I guess, a few paths that you might go down as an individual based on your circumstance and your view on the
Yeah.
world.
So,
But I don't think it's totally predetermined. That's my view. But sorry.
and I kind of agree with you that I'm going to go a little bit weird for a second, but there's this notion that because we effectively follow the laws of physics, right? You have a state, and you can determine based on whatever forces are at play the exact following state, right? So from there, it follows your brain, being a part of the things that are affected by the laws of physics, operates in the same way, which implies that presented with exactly the same information at exactly the same time with exactly the same conditions, you will always make the same decision. Now, and you can go all the way down to subatomic particles with this way of thinking until you get to effectively quantum stuff. And I'm not a physicist in any way, but when you get to that point, you have probability distributions, right? So like, what is really happening is that the current state changing the probability distributions for the following states, which then adds in randomness, which then also means that you probably wouldn't make the same decision. But what I'm getting at is back to the agents question, right? If you believe deterministic version of it, because at a macro level, these quantum effects really don't apply that much, right? Like if you drop a ball on the floor, it kind of drops in the same way. You will get to the conclusion that sure, you can have a human that communicates with the agents and determines intent, But then you can also encode that into an AI where you ask, what is the most optimal intent that I should have under these conditions? So you end up in the Westworld kind of Westworld season 3, I think, kind of future, where you have this giant ball that looks at all the possible futures of humanity and tweaks things everywhere to keep everything on track, right? But it may actually not be the case, right? And if it's not the case, that means that you do still want the human in that loop, the declaration of intent. Or it may be that there are too many variables, and this is one of the things that the brain is really good at, is that there are too many variables, and brains are really good at focusing attention on a small number of important variables out of millions.
Yeah.
And then that determines what is the decision for the intent of the thing that I'm trying to do.
Yes, so for me then it becomes, if AI helps us to predict things in the design phase, it's actually simulating potential outcomes, right? The human element is optimization then. How do we optimize based on those outcomes for me?
No,
Or
I think
are we saying-
the
Yeah,
human
go ahead.
element is setting the goal of the optimization,
Okay. So
right?
we're still allowing
So
AI to optimize as well.
yeah, you can have AI to optimize, but you say I'm optimizing for X,
Right. Okay.
right? So I care the most about money, I care the most about time, I care the most about quality, or I have specific things that this thing needs to do, right? So I don't know, if you're building a corporate headquarters, intent may be expressed as I want it to be the coolest corporate headquarters ever, or I want it to be the cheapest corporate headquarters ever, right? And that entirely depends on who's running the company, right? Case in point, Apple versus Oracle, I think, have not exactly the Apple donut as their headquarters, right? You could express all sorts of different intents and goals for the optimization, and then you let, like, call it like the rational, logical part be the A, and we only really express the wants and needs.
Isn't that
Of-
scary? AI being rational.
It would be a first, right? Like, I don't know many humans that are rational.
Yeah, exactly. We can go down the whole rationality topic as well, but we won't. In some cases, we completely need AI to do human jobs, as Greg has previously said.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to name any names, so we'll try and get that out of him when he's
No,
later
no.
on. Okay, so we've spoken around predictive applications. Do we then, from the design phase, also then get prescriptive outcomes as well, to saying you know this is what you must do so that this can happen or have to do?
I think you will, right? Like, I think it's a given that you'll get those kind of outputs, especially if you're expressing what the desired end state is, and there's only really one or a handful of pathways that lead you to that end state. And that's when it becomes a you must do X, right? We have a bunch of pathways, but they all go through the same point, right? So they all go through the same decision.
Yep.
So if you want to build the coolest corporate headquarters on the planet, you have to buy this piece of land.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can do it in all sorts of different ways. Or you have to hire this architect.
What a boring place we'd be in.
I don't think. I mean, we'll find ways of making it not boring.
What, we just play more sports?
Maybe, like, not necessarily, right? Like, even making the job at hand less boring.
Yeah.
Right. Humans are really good at creating work for themselves as well.
Yes. I think you previously said, right? Was it in the 60s or 70s how we were supposed to get to this 4-day work week, and we're still not there. In fact, it's probably about an 8-day work week for most.
Thought experiment. If we had, by some magic wand, if we had universal basic income for literally everyone on the planet.
Yep.
Make it whatever number you want in your head, right? This is a thought experiment. Do we get to the situation where people are hanging out and with their family doing leisure stuff all the time? No. You would end up with pretty much everyone on the planet trying to be an Instagram influencer.
Yeah,
I think, right?
I often think about this, right? If you take tribes in the Amazon, for example, that have no contact with modern civilization, yet they have a construct and a community with people that have roles and a place in a community, and they are completely happy and healthy with what they're doing. They don't have the modern technology that we have. I think humans will still need a role to play and be part of a community of some sorts. And whether that's being an influencer, or whether that's being a lead of some sort or playing a part in the community of some sort, we'll always find something to do. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? And it's just another fascinating one that if, specifically in the projects world, if we're talking about, if we're talking about utopia, is it actually utopia where AI does everything or the majority of things for us? I certainly would love for AI to replace project controls, and I'm a project controller, right? Because the value add isn't the traditional project controls work we do by putting schedules together or by, running Monte Carlo analysis or, plugging in actual costs into a spreadsheet. The real value add should be, well, what's the decision you have to make as a project controller? And I'd love to, because one, we don't have enough people, but two, also, that's not value add. And so I'd love for AI or technology certainly to replace the majority of what a project controller does or professional does.
Don't you think that's the same as expressing intent?
Yeah.
Right? You set the goals and then the rest of the machine runs the optimization.
Absolutely. But I think for me, certainly, and the reason I put out there from my own perspective is those that listen to this is, don't be afraid to first look at what you're doing and going, how can AI replace the stuff I do in my job? Don't be afraid of that, because there'll always be something else. As we say, today's problems are yesterday's solutions, right? So there'll always be something to do.
How do you get to that conclusion, right? Like you introspected and looked at your own world and you came to the conclusion that you just want most of it to be replaced by AI. How did you get there? What was the thought process?
Well, I mentioned a couple of things. First off, I don't think we have enough skilled individuals in the profession. It takes long to give a project controls professional the right experience and exposure to lots of different scenarios to be particularly good. And through that, they have to do a lot of handle turning. Secondly, I have an innate drive to add value to anything I do. And I think, to be fair, a lot of project professionals do want to add value. No one really wants to be turning the handle, although a lot of people do. Why? Because the demand is there, and sometimes it pays well, right? You get paid. You can get paid really well for pushing buttons on Primavera P6 and not fully understanding what's going on site. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're creating this false economy, if you want, reward for very little effort. So that's why people would do it. And for me, if we're trying to solve the problem of better outcomes on projects, how do you incentivize innovation? And also, it's just more fun to not do the boring stuff, right? Let AI do the boring stuff. So that's a couple of things that go through my head when I think, how can it replace what I do?
What if it ends up doing more than the boring stuff, though?
Awesome. Because then I have someone that I can bounce off of as well as you. Because the thing is, for me, I don't see AI as a threat. I see AI as a companion. But I think a lot of people aren't there yet. They are yet to be convinced.
How do we convince them?
I don't think it's for us to convince them. I think you need to convince yourself if you're listening to this. You need to be the one that goes, "I'm curious." If you're not curious, guess what? You'll never learn anything. You'll just be stuck in where you are. Um, we are speaking to the converted, because anyone that does listen to us is already curious. But I think the
Yes,
question
true.
then becomes is not how do we, you and I, it's how do we collectively, everyone that listens to this, how do you go out there and let people know that, hey, start thinking introspectively. It's the critical thinking. It's all of this, because I think it comes back to people's core values as well and their belief systems. And now we're getting into the whole human aspect of how to use AI.
It always is, though. We always
It
get
is.
there.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's not a dichotomy, right? It's actually symbiotic, and it needs to be something that's consciously spoken about. And actually, that's the reason, one of the main reasons we do this podcast, is to share thoughts, views, and ideas. And so it can start getting people to think. So there's one avenue. But I think if you are a listener of this podcast, go out there into the workplace, friends, family, whatever it might be, and just start either sharing your perspectives or challenging others in a nice way, obviously. Yeah. But anyway, look, we are heading to the end of the pod, Al. With any other thoughts you wanted to finish off with?
No, I actually enjoyed hearing your perspective on this. I think it's interesting because you're thinking about how AI is going to supplement you whilst being in the middle of it, right? And yeah, fair point. We're not going to convince anyone on the Gen AI podcast because they're already here. So I don't know how to solve that one.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep spreading the word, I guess. Reshare, repost,
Yeah,
repost for us.
share the clips.
Share the clips, share the links. But also, I will say as well, I'm not the only one. I speak to lots of professionals, and more are looking and considering
Yeah.
and upskilling. So I think it's a growing trend. And we previously said it, in the words of Elon Musk, it'll be quicker to wait for those dinosaurs to die out than to change them. So I think with generations moving into these roles, these
Hey,
future roles,
maybe
we'll
we'll
see
just
change.
need less people, so we can offer more pensions
Stealth, yeah,
at an earlier age.
exactly.
I think I'm coming
Then,
up for retirement age soon. So.
then becomes a government issue again, another a younger aging population.
Yeah.
But anyway, great. Look, we've mused all around. Again, hopefully, folks, you have got something out of this. I certainly have. I always gain a lot out of speaking to you, Al. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll catch everyone on the next episode. So thank you very much for joining us on this one. Take care and bye for now.
Bye.